Hello, everybody, and welcome to the workshop on European media between Facebook and the need of European public opinion, a European TV streaming platform as infrastructure for pluralism and democracy. Obviously, we're talking about a very huge topic, which is about information, communication, the role of trust and trustworthy. Sorry, can you hear me okay? Because the acoustic in this room is a bit, yeah. So we're talking about a very, very crucial issue of our democracies, not only in Europe, but in the rest of the world, information. We are seeing it now in this very moment that with the war in Ukraine, as it always happens, the truth has been the first victim. But not only that, we are seeing that the modern technology allows for an unprecedented level of manipulation, disinformation, and this is destabilizing our world, our democracies. So how do we fight back? We are under attack, that's for sure, but what can we do? So this panel counts on really extraordinary competencies, and we are going to be connected with the Vice President of the European Parliament at 11:15, who of course is the guardian of European democracy. So they have a very important role to play and a very important responsibility. But without further ado, I would like to introduce Paul Nemitz, that is going to do a quick introduction. But the fundamental question is still what it was at the beginning of democracy. Thomas Jefferson said that a democracy can function and depends only on informed, educated citizenship. So without an informed and educated citizenship, there is no democracy. So how do we get there? Because the time has come. Paul.
Thank you very much. There is an old dream which has been discussed much in this type of forums, which is the European public. How do we create the European public? There were people who tried to set up European newspapers and so on. And all this is still a subject of an academic debate, but it's difficult to bring it forward. But there's also a new debate on the democratic public, which is the debate about the misinformation, the disinformation, the propaganda, which lives through and is accelerated through the new internet platforms. And we also know that 50% of people in the United States and also in Europe build their political opinions on the platforms. So I think we have to see these two debates together when we ask ourselves, what are we going to do about the European public? And we have to remember now, and this is the new thing, that we do not only have a challenge of democratizing the EU, this continues to be a challenge, and we had the previous panel results about this. But the new challenge is that we must also make sure that democracy in member states continues to live on. And in this situation, we must look, I think, at the positive potential of the new technologies. It is not enough to constrain the negative effects of the social platforms, the private infrastructures of public opinion, the hate acceleration through the extremist algorithm, which always gives preference to the most exciting content, and this is often content which is not necessarily the truth. But we must look at the positive potential, and I think we must remember that in order to make democracy and citizenship work, we have a tradition in Europe which is very different from that of the United States, and which is a learning from fascism. We remember that Hitler made it in great part due to the radio. And the result of that was that after the Second World War, the radio and the television were heavily regulated. Democracy took charge of shaping the information space and continues to do so. And by the way, this mix between public and private infrastructures in Europe is not confined to media. We have the same in banking. We have public and private banking. In health, we have a mix between public and private infrastructure and so on. And this is very different to America. And I think we have to be proud about it. We don't have to go with our head down. And so my thesis would be, if we want to develop further the concept of citizenship, which is already ingrained in the treaties of the European Union, then we must build on this great tradition of a mixed infrastructure. And in this case, it means that in addition to the private infrastructures, which have been built not only in the internet, we have private TV, public TV, but on the internet, for the time being, exclusively private infrastructures of Google, Facebook, and so on. We need to invest in a public infrastructure. And my proposition would be, we start with something very simple, namely a platform in the legal sense of the word, so not a station, not another Arte, not a European BBC, but a platform which is a streaming platform only for the pre-existing TV news content and political documentaries from all the public and private TV stations in Europe. And the platform only provides 3 services. It makes this content searchable in an integrated way. It provides the translation services into all languages, in the beginning undertitled, later live language translation when the technology is ripe, but for undertitles, I think it is ripe. And it provides the streaming interface. Is this now possible? Because in the past, this was always the argument, it's not possible, technology doesn't provide this. I think we have all these technologies in Europe, we just have to put the stack together. And I would like to end with a reminder that also some of the old wisdoms of journalism, which always led to saying people immediately, this is never going to work, people are not interested in foreign language news, and so this, I think we have to question. And I would like to give you one figure which made me think. So let's take one classic killer argument, smart journalism, publicist professors, sorry to say. Foreign language in TV, people don't like that, translation doesn't work. The reality is today, and this is empirics, that DeepL, the translation website from Cologne, is the 146th most used website in the world. Now, what does that tell us? It tells us that once technology provides a look into the other culture, into the other language, into many other languages, there's huge demand for this. Would you have thought that such a startup becomes 146th most used website in the world? So I think those who in the past said it's never going to work, nobody is interested in foreign language stuff. Well, I would say, please, also you have to come up to the realities and empirics of the new technologies and realize that translation services are actually fascinating people because people want to know. So I'm not saying this is going to be a blockbuster. I'm not going to say it's going to work commercially. It needs to be publicly financed. That's why I'm saying it has to be part of the new mixed infrastructure of the European public sphere. But I also don't want to go into this project and not from the outset make it clear that many of the old, this is never going to work, objections are not founded anymore. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paul. That was concise and brilliant enough. So go next straight to Matthias. Matthias has given a lot of thought to this idea of a European platform, and he has a very precise plan with very intelligent points. So please let us discover what you've been thinking of.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, Paul already pointed out some of the ideas of the necessity of a European streaming media platform for television content. Let me just go back to the real fundamental argument in this. And this is the real worth of information, of free information for a democracy. We all know since Habermas then that a public space where everyone has free access to verified information, we must say today, is a precondition, absolutely precondition for then building opinions by free debating. And so the freedom of speech is not only the absence of any rules or laws, as it is always said in America. It is combined to laws and rules, as Paul pointed out, as we know it since World War II in the media systems here in Europe, very clear that we have to stick to quality content and that we need this source of information, otherwise the fundamentals of democracy will be lost. So we need to take back control over information. That's a clear statement, I think, in these days where we live in times of disinformation and where we see that disinformation is one of the most important parts of the modern wars that we are facing. So let me just say some things about this public platform Paul already pointed out. First of all, we need to use technology to serve democracy in order to undermine it all the time. And we need to reflect on the digital paradox, that is that the digital technology is enabling to connect all the people, let's say on the earth together, as the promise of Facebook says, connecting the people of the world. But on the other side, we see effectively that it is splitting up the people through the filter bubbles, echo chambers, and so on, by spreading really hate, false information and disinformation. So, and in this, it works against democracy and against our values. And this is because it is the promise, the old promise of the digitalization is sacrificed to an economic model, which we should clearly see as an enemy of the public sphere. This platform that I suggest is a TV streaming platform. First question is what content and how to secure good content, quality content. The answer is quite simple. We do have a lot of quality content in terms of documentaries, information programs in the European Union. Only in Germany, the citizens spend 9 billion euros a year to finance a huge public system. And by the way, we only have, I think, about 2 million people living in Slovenia, which is a smaller country. Imagine how many resources they can afford to produce this content. And so why not take the content of the bigger public service medias, like in Italy and France, in the bigger countries, and make it accessible to all European citizens, because we can do so. The second complex of questions that arises is the question of technology. Paul already mentioned that as well. There is the technology available, and we in Europe can develop it by giving these goals and aims to our companies and startups, and to ask them to build an alternative to these destructive algorithms of Facebook and co. And I'm sure they will come out with wonderful results. This is so to say in media, the Airbus moment of Europe. And the technology is there, we can build it together, so let's only do it. And the third thing is we need a rights alliance as well, because copyright is an obstacle to a Europe-wide use of content so far. We have to work on this problem, but for the beginning, I don't see any problems because there are already enough information programs, documentaries, which are completely in the rights holding of the broadcaster who paid for it. And so we should start with that and work on the other problems that are behind. I think it's quite easy to do so. A last remark on the governance of such a platform. It must be obviously state-far organized, but at the same time funded by the European Commission. I think this is possible because it has been shown in several cases before, and we need that. And on the other side, we must see This is not a television station or a European broadcaster that we talk of, because it's not one European public that we want to create with editors in Brussels reflecting on what's going on in Brussels all the time. We need the multi-perspectives of the existing professional journalists from all over Europe and make it accessible to the others so that they can really build a diverse and a new European perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Matthias. The project, the Delphi platform, is obviously extremely interesting and new because it takes advantage of technology. I myself have been involved in European information for the past 30 years. And when I started, I was at Euronews, and the problem of producing 6 different linguistic versions was enormous, and it still is. So languages in Europe, in a country, in a bloc of 27 countries, is obviously always been an obstacle in creating a shared public sphere. So the fact that now technology allows to simultaneous translation, it's a huge game changer. So I think that as we are here to think outside the box and to think about the EU's men and women moment on the moon, we need to see that the technology has radically changed and allows really something that is visionary and that yesterday could not be done. So for someone like me who has always dreamed of this, and now it's the time to take advantage of technology. Of course, the idea of putting the best content production into one place, into one go-to place, let's call it the EU Tube, a place where everybody can go, is incredibly attractive, because what we've seen during the Russian aggression of Ukraine is that there was extreme confusion in Europe. There were so many different perceptions of reality. There was an extraordinary amount of disinformation and manipulation of information. The idea that we could have a place, even as an embryonic public sphere, digital arena, where everybody could go and find public service content that is editorially sound in a way that you cannot ever guarantee on YouTube or on Facebook, it's extremely attractive. And I think that it's brilliant that we've come up with this idea, because it builds up on something that is already there, the excellency of the production of content of the public service across Europe. But of course, that's not enough. It's not enough, because what we need is also to create a space where people can trust some editorial information. So this platform can only be one part of the puzzle, because the other part of a proper public service information system in Europe that can rebuild trust and truth must be some sort of editorial perspective. And in this sense, sadly, we have seen that the attempts of the European Union, like Euronews, have unfortunately failed because of the structure in which this information system was created. Just for those who don't remember it, I was part of it when it was created. It was created in the 90s as a reaction to the American monopoly of the 24 hours news information. When there was the Gulf War, Europe woke up to the fact that the only storytelling, the only narrative about the Gulf War was that one of CNN. That's when we started Euronews. It was a great idea 30 years ago, but it failed because in the execution of the project, Europe lost itself. The real importance of it, the European perspective on the world, was lost. We see now, 30 years later, how tragic that mistake was, because we have lost 30 years in building that consciousness, that awareness of the European values, and that trust in a shared narrative of the events unfolding around us. So this needs to be claimed back urgently, and we look forward to talk with the Vice President of the Parliament, because they need to take information seriously. But for now, I would like to ask the opinion of Bill Emmott, former editor of The Economist, in the opportunity today in Europe to start talking again about truth and kind of authority, and trying to establish something not from the market. Because obviously, as a former editor of The Economist, you would have strong views on creating something from the public sector with public money and so on. What are your views about a public service platform in Europe?
Thank you, Annalisa, and thank you for having me as a respondent on here. I mean, my first response to the specific proposal of Paul and Matthias is that it's a brilliant idea of making more out of what we already have. That's its smartness. We should not underrate, and I know Matthias will not be underrating it, the cost of it, because although the technology may be cheap, the rights will be the real cost. Because the fundamental thing about publicly financed broadcasting is that actually they operate more like the market than even commercial companies, because they are resource constrained, and absolutely they want to sell their quality content to anyone who will pay for it in order to keep financing the next quality content. So this will be more expensive than it sounds. But since the technology is there, since the translation is a powerful aspect of it, especially, my response to it is, why not? As you say, however, Annalisa, this has to be part of a broader strategy. Will people watch and go to this? Well, I mean, the results of the translation website tells you that they will. Secondly, if you offer people something that's free, yeah, they do tend to go to it. But third, there are a lot of streaming services that are either close to free or actually free. They sometimes actually free because they're pirates. And they're stealing, but also they're close to free in the sense that they're a low-cost subscription model, like Netflix, of course. So we also have to, I think, be sober about the impact that this can have. We also have to recognize, I think, that one person's quality content is the next person's biased, elitist, false narrative, so that the curation and presentation of this content is not an insignificant problem. It's a significant problem. I spent a short and inglorious time on the board of the media regulator in the UK called Ofcom, where I was called chair of the content board, which was about enforcing broadcasting regulations in the UK. And I was dismissed from the board because I had the wrong views about Brexit by July 2016. So politics comes into regulation just like it comes into to everything. So that's a thing that's important to recognize. But the key thing is that this has to be part of a strategy to combat what can be called the infodemic, the torrent of information, especially disinformation. It sounds like a very useful idea, but we have to make it as part of a strategy. Point one would be to legislate, as indeed Europe is a leader in requiring responsibility for other digital platforms of what they're doing. And I know Matthias and Paul agree with that. To try to force the digital platforms to actually spend more on curation and verification
than is the case at the moment. If they are required by law, then they will have to spend more on that. Second, I think that the need for publicly channeled information is increasing, and I would suggest that the internet and online is absolutely a vital part of it. And perhaps we should look at the best model, as far as I know, is in Taiwan, where their digital minister, Audrey Tang, has pioneered, who is basically a Silicon Valley person, has pioneered a communication and discussion system in Taiwan. This is not video, but information, which I think played a major role in their management of the pandemic, for example, but also, she says, has played a big role in combating disinformation, which obviously the target that they're worrying about is mainland China. So I think one should try to learn from other examples like that. I would suggest inviting Audrey Tang to speak by video at the next Great Vision conference, and try to learn from what Taiwan has done. What she says is that an important element of this is not only to be trusted with your information, but for the government to trust the citizens and involve them. What I don't know is how you do that. But nevertheless, to sum up, excellent proposal. It needs to be part of course, a broader framework of combating disinformation.
Thank you very much, Bill. That's very interesting and also very valuable to remind us that in 2016 in Britain, the person in charge of content for the regulator of the media could be dismissed for his political views on Brexit. So in the mother of all democracies, Britain, that we expect to be extremely rigorous in respecting diversity of views and freedom of opinion and information, that was possible. So that's a very strong reminder that if we don't react to what is happening, we can't expect things to get any better. Things are getting worse by the day. And so we need to be aware that the longer we wait on this front, on protecting the public sphere when it comes to information, the worse it will get. And I remember a phrase that was said by a democracy professor in the United States when Trump was elected. And he said, you know, we got it wrong. We got it completely wrong in America because we thought that democracy was about freedom of expression. Yes, it is, but it needs to be counterbalanced by the respect of truth. And we failed there because he quite rightly said, if you spread toxic substances on the internet, on Amazon, you get to jail. If you spread the toxic false information, it's freedom of expression, but you're poisoning me, you're poisoning my country. And information can be toxic and venomous. And what we saw with the storming of the Capitol, we saw that false information can kill people, can kill a democracy. So it's big time, it's urgent to do something. And I completely agree with Bill that the Delphi platform is a genius idea because it uses the excellence of content which is already produced and put it in a place where all citizens in Europe can access it. But it can't be the only thing. It needs to be part of a broader strategy that brings back information in Europe as a public good, a public value that needs to be protected and nurtured, because in absence of this, our democracies are failing because we can't actually inform citizens about the most important things in their life, our societies. I would like to make a point about funding. Bill quite rightly said the Delphi platform is very interesting, but probably is not going to be as cheap as we think, just because of technology. You need some curation. Who is going to choose? Who is going to actually bring together all these amazing materials that are produced? We know that there are extraordinary. I'm a documentary maker. I know the amount of extraordinary stuff that is produced every day in the EU and it is not accessible to the citizens. But who is going to choose? So the problem of curating it and the political accountability of who does that is not a small problem. It's not unsurmountable. You know, when there is a will, there is a way. And we have models like the previous model of the BBC worked very well for more than 50 years. The kind of firewalling of the board of governors from any political interference. So we need to come up with clever ideas that would actually protect the full independence of this platform and any future kind of editorial initiative. And talking about money, how long do we have seen? Okay, we got a few minutes before we talk with the Vice President of the Parliament. Money, as we said before in other workshops, is not an issue at the moment. I mean, we are in a moment in which we are financing the recovery plan, and we have enormous amounts of funding that should go to the priorities of the European Union. Democracy is the #1 priority of the European Union, and we have not put it at the center of our European Union action as it should have been. But also that there are there is a lot of waste. I was just checking, just to mention once, in 2022, the European Union spent 12 million euros on the EU Stratcom. Does anybody know what is the EU Stratcom? Very good, brilliant. So one out of an audience, you must know because you work at the External Action Service that is actually coming up with that idea. Okay, so the EU Stratcom is a unit that tries to fight disinformation mainly from Eastern Europe, and the technical name is FIMI, how do you pronounce it? Foreign Information and Manipulation Interference. Okay, so the European Union has been growing more and more aware that this foreign information manipulation and interference is a serious threat. So it has been establishing tools to try to combat it. But how successful has that been? If you do a quick search on the internet, you see that the EU Stratcom newsletter has got something like a few thousand subscribers. So do you know how many? Okay, well, I've done the search. I can't remember the exact figure, but let's say that in a continent of more than 300 million citizens, a 12 million investment in fighting foreign interference and manipulation of information that has in the order of, let's call it 100,000 users. Is it effective? So what I want to say is that we know that this is serious. We know that we need to act. That there are funds available, but they're not spent in the context of a broader strategy that can actually, for the first time, really address the problem of a European Union public sphere that can be trusted and used by all citizens, that automatically, when the 23rd of February, the Russian tanks crossed the border with Ukraine, in an ideal society, all Europeans should have been able to go to a go-to place, a European go-to place, and check what was going on. Instead, we had an explosion of cacophony and fragmented views in which obviously whoever wants to manipulate information, disinformation, had a field day. And we saw it very clearly in Italy, where the Russian disinformation machine was in full steam, and we saw the results of it: confusion, mistrust, disappointment, loss of confidence in Europe. So this is urgent, and this is now, and it can be done. It can be done because of technology. It can be done because there are genius ideas like this one to actually leverage what we already do. It can be done because there are funds that at the moment are put here and there. But there needs to be a mind shift, a fundamental mind shift. And we are here exactly to do that, to say, you know, we need to have a proper, trustworthy public service information system that can rebuild faith of European citizens in their democracies and in truth.
Yeah. I think I will agree with everything, but I would like to make a few small remarks, and now I have to correct myself, a little bit of type. I'll do this now.
We got 10 minutes before the connection.
So Matthias said initially, he emphasized the big countries which produce the news, the Germans with 9 billion, and that should be at the core of what's distributed. I'm not sure. I mean, we have to be careful that this is not seen as a project of the big countries, but I would say actually it could be much more interesting to have the news from the very many small countries, you know, from the Baltic states right now, from the Czech Republic, and others. So I would certainly hope that when the platform starts to be built, the request for content, the content alliance, is not only the big ones. We don't need another Arte, which is just Germany and France. And also Boeing is not a good picture for this, because Boeing is two countries. Not Boeing, sorry, Airbus. Airbus is two countries. Airbus is two countries, Germany and France, with a little bit of the UK, with a little bit of Spain, but that's not, I think, the idea of this platform. The idea of this platform is to take serious that we have a plurality in the sense that we have 27, and it's also not only about public TV, it's also about private TV. So it needs to represent the diversity and sometimes also the contradictory content, I would think. I think it, you know, so we have to be careful with what pictures we are using. And by the way, Airbus has been set up to compete with the United States with Boeing, and it is very successful, but it's a private company. It's on the stock exchange, it's for profit. So also from that point of view, the picture of Airbus is not quite right. We're not doing it to compete with the US, not at all. We're doing it for our own democracy, and we're doing it not as a market model. Now let me say something about the cost argument and copyright argument. You know, she's already there. Okay, then I stop. If she's there, then let's hear her. But on the copyright argument, I would just say, you know, we had a problem with streaming services, private streaming services, Netflix. You could not take the abonnement across borders. That was a very important point for Vice President Ansip in the last commission, who was the Vice President for Digital, and he wanted that people in Europe can take the abonnement, which they do in one country on Netflix, across the border to other countries. And the law was changed. So I'm quite confident that on this project, if it's true what you're saying, namely that the public TV stations in particular don't play ball and say, you know, we want to see big money for this, in the end, small outlet, probably. Let's be realistic. It's not going to be a big plus, blockbuster. I think it will not take money away from anybody. But if it's really so, I think, you know, there is the option of either putting more money into it or just changing the law and saying, for this one purpose, non-profit, financed from the European budget, already there you cannot ask for extra money. And I think that's why it's so important that it's confined to political news and political documentaries, which often are self-produced by the stations. Not entirely, but in a large part. So let's not build up, let's say, a theoretical barrier which maybe we can overcome. I also see that inside the EBU, there is a willingness to exchange programs. The only problem with that project of the EBU is that they want to do a play out only through the National Mediathek. And that's not good enough. And let me tell you why. Because the crisis of democracy, of course, is also a crisis of control over national public media. So to make this concrete, what's the difference between the EBU and our idea of this platform? If you follow the EBU model, it doesn't help the Poles, it doesn't help the Hungarians, because the Mediathek of the Polish TV will not contain in Polish the news, the critical news about Poland, which comes from Slovenia, Denmark, and the Baltic states, and all the other member states, because they will weed that out. And the Hungarians will not do it either. But that's the whole purpose of the European platform, that Hungarians in Hungarian can see all the news from the other countries about Hungary, and the same for Poland. So that is one very important added value of the European platform compared to the EBU model, which is, sorry to say, typically, all the chiefs of the national TV stations, they only think about their station. They don't think about the public good they could contribute to when they go into a different structure with their content. Will they lose something from this? Not at all. The platform, of course, has to attribute the viewings to the national stations and make the intendanten, the chiefs of the stations, proud that a few extra European citizens have seen their programs, which of course will continue to be produced, spirit of producer, for the national audience. So I'm quite convinced that nobody will lose, nobody will be taken money away. So let's also be relaxed about this a little bit and not make a drama or a problem out of it which doesn't exist. This is not a self-competition of public TV with itself. That's what some of the chiefs of the station say. I really don't think that is a good argument. I mean, I would say those who make that argument, well, they have a different agenda. It's a little bit about, do we only want national perspectives, or do we want some common pool of the diversity? And we are not advocating that this station contains EU-produced news, becomes a propaganda machine for the European Parliament or for the Commission. And certainly, as far as the governance is concerned, we have to learn from, the good models of shielding it from government influence, shielding it from the EU institutions, but the money has to be public.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And of course, if there is a will, there is a way. The whole thing about sending men on the moon was not sorry, the whole thing about using the metaphor of the man on the moon is to say, if we can send a man to Mars, we can make a European platform work. That's easier. Are we in standby to talk with the... Oh, okay, so we can just...
So let me just say...
here's a question, two questions, three questions in the audience.
Let's start with the questions.
Okay,
yes,
but we are 2 minutes away from connecting with the President of the Parliament. Can we do it later? Let's do it later, because I don't want to cut you off.
We wait for her to join us.
So we get 2 minutes, Matthias, if you want to say something quickly.
Yes, very quickly. Just to return to Paul critics, because we are in an open discussion about this project. I just want to mention, same what you said. We need some big pictures. We are here for visions of Europe. And it cannot be that way. I mean, I did a big research on the so-called Californian ideology, and it's all based on storytelling. It's storytelling about making the world a better place by using technology, enabling technology, whatever it wants to do, and let them just do it, and we solve all the problems with technology. This is a very mighty narrative. And we really are forced to set up a new narrative about Europe, which is different from that, which means that democracy is using technology and not being dismantled or undermined by technology. And therefore, we need big pictures. And I state to that, I mean, the Airbus just shows, for example, it's possible that different industries in Europe can collaborate and can build excellence out of that. It's possible, even if it's different in many matters that you mentioned. And the second thing is, the smaller countries and the bigger countries, this should not come into a discussion about imperialism and how we have it today, because, for example, the German or the French system is the most powerful in terms of money. No, this is paid by European citizens, and we are all European citizens, and we have the right to get access to this kind of information and kind of quality, because we are all paying for Europe, because we all live in Europe, and we all want to have a Europe Union and live together and want to get better understanding about each other's. And therefore, I close again. Let's take control again about the information.
Let's take control back of European information. Yes, it is fundamental to keep that perspective. is that we are claiming back something that is ours. So all European citizens already pay their public services, broadcasters and system in many, many different ways to provide them with a public good, which is trustworthy information. So that exists already. It's just that we have lost it. Because of the disruption brought by technology, by internet, by social media, and so forth, but also because we have never really created the equivalent of that for our European citizens. That has been the biggest failing of the European Union, if you ask me, in my perspective, because that's what has been lacking the most, and that's what has been actually facilitating the undermining of the European values, because they have not been defended in a place where citizens could actually belong to. Okay, is she on?
Yes.
Hello there.
Hi.
Hello, Vice President Eva Kaili. Thank you so much for joining us. We are really delighted that you could find the time, because we are trying to have a EU man on the moon moment. So we're trying to imagine a new vision for Europe, a new vision for our democracies, and at the heart of this new vision, there is a better understanding and protection of our democracies. And in this sense, we feel that there is much more that needs to be done. There is much more that needs to be bolder today about protecting information in Europe as a public good. You are the Vice President of the European Parliament, which is the guardian of European democracy. So we are delighted you are here. We want to hear your views. You know that we have been discussing an innovative concept, the concept of a European platform that would share public broadcasters' content. The first question that I would like to ask you is, this proposal is very interesting. We would like to know what you think, but what is your action at the moment as the European Parliament in devising a new, broader strategy about protecting information in the European Union?
First of all, let me thank you for having me. I am in an official mission. That's why I couldn't be with you. But I know most of you, and I have worked with you, and I really appreciate the views that you shared, and already the fact that we are having such a discussion under a new crisis that we're facing, which is also the war in Ukraine, a crisis of disinformation and cyber war that we need to address as Europeans. I'm working a lot of years on technologies, on science and technology, and the whole concept that we have in the European Parliament is to make sure that we don't direct citizens into what they have to know or learn, but to give them options. We need to make sure that they will have access to scientific information and they will understand how we make our decisions. It has been a difficult, I would say, journey to make sure also that we will find out how the technology can be used, but even manipulated to change that, to even attack our democracies or to undermine our values. It has happened in several levels, and we all decided a few years ago to start building a strategy on how to respond to that, how to become more resilient, and how also to remove all the barriers we have online especially, but also offline. So one of the barriers that we have in most of the problems we're trying to solve is we speak different languages. We have different legislations. We're coming from a slightly different cultural background and histories, and we're slowly trying to build this European identity by making sure that the citizens, when they travel, they will be able to communicate as if they were home, or we have to have the possibility to access the same content, so to remove geo-blocking, which was actually a problem till 4 years ago. I worked on the legislation. Geo-blocking meant you enter a site just to have an access to information for a service or for a product, or of course content, and you would be either banned or redirected of accessing this content, or you would have a different content tailor-made for you, and even different prices for the services you wanted to have access to. And we worked to remove these barriers because we considered it would be a discrimination for European citizens. And the final piece of this puzzle was content. The reason was it was very complicated to solve the IP rights. It was there was not enough content to give access to. It was the barrier of the languages, and of course of different associations. So the discussion though opened, and I see not only it's maturing, but it's becoming a necessity. With the war in Ukraine, for example, it was not easy to make sure that citizens would have accurate information. There was like two different sides of the story, videos that they were like challenged from different sides. So it was not very easy to see, to believe in what you see. We have also a technology that's developing deep fake videos, which means you can have a synthetic me talking now, and nobody, even the developers, cannot tell if it's me or if it's actually a synthetic video, which meant that we would have a direct threat to our democracy. We would stop trusting what we see, and we had to prepare into solving that. We worked again in several ways. We know now that the technology, of course, can give answers into registering when a video is uploaded, to verify the source, to ensure that there will be legal implications if somebody will try to manipulate content or perceptions online. In the Artificial Intelligence Act, there is a very clear reference. I started working on the file since 2018, actually, and we said that this is something that should not be allowed. And now it's also the high-risk applications, which means more safeguards for any effort of manipulating content. So reaching this point where we now can remove the final barriers to give access to Europeans to content, and also to ensure that member states that can create content, they have the possibility, they have a better funding, or they have better infrastructure, should be able to make it available throughout the European Union without having to go through VPN or like through ways that they are not acceptable. We are building on this concept that you were actually discussing. I'd consider it to be a very European, a very democratic concept that would be not just welcomed by the European citizens and embraced, but I believe also it would be very welcomed also from the companies and everybody that would like to have access to a broader audience. So again, technology, as we found out during the pandemic, gives us the tools to overcome these barriers. So we saw that we can use artificial intelligence to try to understand faster by having access to data, the pattern of the disease, and as we created common standards, more data we had and better quality of understanding and results we would get. So I believe we have the technology to ensure we will have instant translation for content. We have the understanding and the necessity to have access to public TV and operation, not just news, but documentaries, but also even movies. The moment somebody knows that this is an existing platform or possibility, the content will come. There was also an ambition of having a European platform that would compete to Netflix up to at least 30%. We would ask Netflix to have 30% of European content. So there's been already, let's say, an alert of European creators should start thinking at a different level, addressing a different market. We've seen also recently with several discussions for rule of law that a lot of states, each government have this tendency to control media in one way or the other. And I believe that if we manage to have access, especially live access to content, but also an archive that would serve citizens in order for them to be able to read about other countries, to understand how the news are being developed. I think this would increase our common standards. This would increase the quality of our democracy, our quality of information and education. Finally, because I don't want to exhaust it, prefer to discuss with you if there are some other ideas. In Greece, we have an Earthflix, which is the public broadcaster created a platform similar to Netflix. There is content there that comes from very far behind in the time for older movies or series or documentaries that they are accessible for free at any given time. Without having to have it downloaded or trying to get it from YouTube or other platforms that they're private. So you have access, and also it keeps the new content if there are no permissions for a few days at least, so somebody would not have to be connected or online or watching a specific time, but they would have this flexibility of getting back and watch the content of the national broadcasting TV. So I think this could be actually a blueprint. I think we have to make sure that we will have technologies that can translate instantly content, that we do it for the news. This should be the core of the activities, and we should also have more content available for citizens. Yes. I lost you, so I couldn't see you. I'm seeing like an empty table, so I didn't know how long I should go on.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you very much for your thoughts. But because we are planning to send a man and a woman on the moon, we want to have visionary ideas and see what a European media could look like. So, as a Vice President of the European Parliament, I would like to have your answer on two questions. So, is there at the moment a review thinking about a new, broader strategy to protect information as a public good in Europe?
So we already have different efforts that they are ongoing. We have the European Disinformation Campaign that is constantly trying to, let's say, read any efforts of disinformation. We have the code of conduct for countering illegal hate speech online, as you know, and we do have an action plan of for disinformation that has basically presented 4 pillars to have a more coordinated response to that, to improve the capabilities, exactly what we're discussing, to detect, analyze, and also expose disinformation, but also to strengthen the response to that, so not just to figure out what's happening, to be able to respond, to mobilize the private sector and tackle disinformation, and of course, to raise awareness and improve the societal resilience. There are developed, I don't know how into more depth I should go, but we also have an establishment of a rapid alert system. Basically, it's set up to provide alerts on disinformation campaigns in real time. There is also, the creation of the European Digital Media Observatory. I think actually it happened, or it's happening these days, that it has an announcement of the hubs, and also an event that they are all coming together and trying to identify again disinformation campaigns. In the committee that I was chairing, Science and Technology, we set up a science media hub where we are bringing also journalists and scientists and politicians together. The reason we did that was that we believe also journalists should be able to communicate our language to the audience, and we have to have a common understanding. And also to make sure that scientific data will be available for citizens to respond to disinformation. So I'm against banning, as less banning as possible, but I'm pro options. We can connect any disinformation campaign to an alternative let's say, approach, so citizens can see that there are different options.
Very interesting and very good, but is not yet what we were hoping could be an understanding and a desire of tackling the seriousness of the situation with something radical, with a cultural mind shift. The Delphi platform tries to put a first brick in a new way thinking of the role of the European Union and the Parliament in providing public service content. What do you think? I mean, do you think that there could be political support to bring forward a project as innovative as this European public service platform? What is your view politically? Do you think that the Parliament could be behind it?
Yes. 100%. We had discussions, and actually we called for funding of such efforts in order to launch them, to start building on them. Because, as I said, we do have the technology, but we really need to start developing such a platform to have enough content, to develop the technology that could have the translation in different languages, and to test it, of course. You know, also we have the Digital Services Act that was like actually quite ambitious in order of setting more obligations for online players depending on their size. So they also had to take a responsibility there. So I think it's very important that in the same time that we are setting the legal framework, we are seeing these efforts coming together and trying to build on what Europe has signaled really wants to achieve.
Okay, that's brilliant, because that's exactly what we are hoping for. In the Digital Services Act, there are a lot of reflections on how to restrain, control, sanctions, but what we want to hear from the European Union is the kind of a radical cultural shift in knowing that we need to change tack. We need to do more to actually create this public service information arena to which citizens can go to when they need trustworthy information. So we know that you're very busy, but I was wondering if we could really get a sense from you that you think that there is a process that can be started with the support of the European Parliament into going into creating a European space and also breaking the old taboo that wants information to be only on a national level.
Yes, effort and support, anything that provides options and a better quality of content for citizens is something that the European Parliament would support. And of course, as I said, there are already efforts to fund such projects. And I think it's really, really important that we prove and we demonstrate these efforts. Also, we have this like discussion, a dialogue that's like happening on IP rights again. And I think we will need to, let's say, mature and have also European level of IP rights possibility. I think this could solve also problems at national and member states in order to allow more content to be uploaded. We've seen that also we have a technology, and I don't know how familiar you might be, but you definitely have heard about the NFTs, non-fungible tokens. This means you can have like digitally rights on digital content, and you could develop a platform where everybody that has IP rights connected to the content, whenever somebody is accessing and there's like an advertisement on this content, they can be rewarded or they can be paid directly on their like digital wallets. So there are amazing technical solutions to move forward. And of course, you actually represent the citizens' will, and I think that we all know that this would be something they would really appreciate. Not all citizens speak English, not all citizens have access to all the media that we have and information. I think it's our obligation to move fast forward.
Perfect. Well, we thank you very much. Just let me check if there is Thank you so much, Vice President. It was a pleasure to have you, and thank you very much for your support. We will count on it.
Congratulations for the excellent speakers and quality of dialogue that I managed to hear a bit. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. We will let you have the conclusion of the work of this conference, which will include your much appreciated support. Thank you very much. Have a good day. Bye.